Good morning. We can take the good morning. My name is Rachel Nelson, and I'm the Director of Educational Initiatives and the Associate Director of Community Relations at the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland. The last 100+ days now have been so challenging for all of us, and especially for our brothers and sisters in Israel, who've been so traumatized since the horrific Hamas attacks in Israel and continue to live in a state of limbo as so many are deeply impacted every single day. Here in Portland, we have also been impacted and are working to bring our community together. We've held solidarity gatherings and vigils for the hostages. We have been so relieved that over 100 hostages to date have been released, and we call for the release of all remaining hostages soon, immediately. Our Israel Emergency campaign has raised over $2 million, funds that are going directly to Israel for rebuilding and trauma care. We've also been working with our local Israeli community to make sure that those who have family members in Gaza are sharing their stories with the media and they remain in the public eye. We are working to ensure that our Jewish students in public and private schools and university campuses are feeling safe. We are doing our best to counter anti-Semitism that has been spiking since the October 7th attack. And we're encouraging everyone to make calls to your members of Congress continuously. They need to hear from us. They need to know that we expect and urge them to stay steadfast with their support for Israel. I can assure you they're hearing from the other side, and we need to make sure their early support continues to stay strong. Finally, we've created a hub of all things related to Israel and the war for you to follow up with. You can find that on our website, and we'll share that link in the chat. Today, we have a unique opportunity to see inside Gaza using unique drone footage and maps that can ground and center us in a place so far away, yet so present in our minds. While our presentation is happening, the chat has been disabled, but please use the Q&A at the bottom to submit questions. The session is being recorded and will be available on our website. So I'd like to introduce first Israel Policy Forum and then our speakers today. So Israel Policy Forum is a think tank and Jewish communal institution working to shape the discourse and mobilize support among American Jewish leaders and U.S. policymakers for the realization of a secure, Jewish, and democratic Israel. IPF specializes in research and analysis of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, domestic Israeli politics, Palestinian politics, and regional issues. IPF educates political and communal leaders on pragmatic policy ideas, developed by credible security experts. IPF promotes policy measures endorsed by credible security experts, develops analysis and commentary, and convenes programs that engage and educate leaders across the political, denominational, and generational spectrums. I was fortunate and lucky enough to be part of their ATID Conveners program in 2020. Our speaker today, Tzuri Shofman, has served as Israel Policy Forum's Israel representative since 2016. He is the CEO of Mindset Media and Strategy. Tzuri has a background working with various Israeli NGOs and previously held the position of the Jewish Agency Israel Fellow at the University of Southern California. Tzuri is a former combat engineering officer in the IDF and holds a BA in International Affairs and an MA in Nonprofit Management from the Hebrew University. Residing in Jerusalem with his wife and 3 children, he brings a unique blend of experience to his roles. As a fun fact, he's also a certified zookeeper. I also want to acknowledge Max Webb, who's the IAPF ATID Coordinator of Leadership Initiatives, who has helped us organize today. And I'm going to pass it to Tzuri. Tzuri is going to present. And then throughout that, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A. We'll have kind of one big chunk and then of time for Q&A and then time for the second. So I'm going to pass it over to Tzuri. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much for having me. I love that my zookeeper background comes up. If you have any questions on Israeli animals, feel free to put that in the Q&A as well. And I'm going to start off by sharing my screen. And what we're going to do today is basically take a step back and talk about the last few months from a bird's eye view, quite literally, and we'll start about some background of what happened of the Gaza Strip, then move on to the day of the attack, and the response of the IDF and the ground offensive. And finally, hopefully, if we have some time, also talk a little bit about next steps and what we could see moving forward. But first, I'd like to start by orienting us on the map. You could see on the right-hand side, there's a compass. So you could always see where you are, and which direction we're looking at. But if we zoom in a little, we're now looking north with the Tel Aviv and Gush Dan area over here. Let me see if I could highlight the cursor here. Hold on. And it's not working. Okay. And further down south, you have Ashdod, Ashkelon over here. And then as we head further down south, we could already see the northern border of Gaza with the Israeli communities along the northern part of it. Step back and we could see the biggest city in the Gaza envelope. This is Sderot over here. And as we pan south, we could see the Gaza Strip. The red is the border between Gaza and Israel. This big hub, this big area over here, that's Gaza City. We can zoom in a little bit to see it. So Gaza City being the biggest metropolitan in the Gaza Strip, of course. Continuing south, we could see Wadi Gaza, which we're going to be using today, as well as the IDF also uses it, is the landmark dividing Gaza from North Gaza and Southern Gaza. As we head down, we'll see the city that's in the news a lot these days, which is Khan Yunis, which is the biggest metropolitan in the southern part of Gaza. And finally, as we head further down south, this is Rafiah, which is the border city. And you could see over here in orange is the border between Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, which you could see spanning further south. And if we turn back north, you could see the Israeli communities lining the border of the Gaza envelope. So that's just to orient ourselves around this map, which we really built to be kind of a tool to explain what's been going on in the past few months. Also within IPF, we also put this up on our website for anyone to use, which also includes, if you click on the different communities, some information about what happened on the day of the attack. But if we take a step back and look backwards in history of the Gaza Strip, it's worth explaining a few words how we got here. So first of all, Gaza Strip was taken over by Israel in 1967 in the Six-Day War and was not returned to Egypt, who was in control of the Gaza Strip until then during the peace negotiations and finally the deal that gave back Sinai Peninsula. The Egyptians did not want Gaza back, wonder why. And Israel remained in control of the Gaza Strip. And it's worth mentioning that after the settlements of the Sinai Peninsula were evacuated, many communities relocated into areas within the Gaza Strip. Mainly, and I don't have that marked here, I'll have that marked up for the next tour, but mainly in this area over here, which was the Gush Katif area. We're talking about early 70s mostly. And then again, further up north, on the northern part of the Gaza Strip, in this area here. We can actually take a closer look at that to see those settlements over there. So right now we're looking at drone footage from the community of Netiva Sarah. You could see right over here. Again, if we're orienting ourselves, now we're looking north. You could see the Ashkelon power plant in the distance, the Gaza border, and the Gaza communities, the northern communities and cities of Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun, and the refugee camp of Jabalia. And over here, you could see where the northern Jewish settlements of the Gaza Strip were. Mainly, you have the biggest one was Nisanit over here. I actually served over there before the disengagement. Over here, we have Alei Sinai, and further in was a small community of Dugit right by the sea. Now, these settlements were evacuated during the disengagement, and before they were, the border between Israel and Gaza, there was a second fence, went right over here past these communities, and we're basically that's where the borderline and the security fence went before the disengagement, along this area and down through here to the Erez crossing, which we'll talk about very soon. Now, before the evacuation, it's worth saying that there were, after the Second Intifada, and I'll go back to our main map. After the First Intifada, Second Intifada, there were a lot of clashes between terrorist organizations from the Gaza Strip and the IDF. A lot of attacks on the settlers living in the settlements of Gush Katif, Netzarim, and the northern communities, and including rockets that were fired from Gaza as early as 2001. Of course, the range of the rockets was not quite what we know of today. As I was stationed in this area over here, I remember on weekends I would just stand up there and see rockets just go right over my head from Beit Lahia and Beit Hanun, mostly targeting the city of Sderot in the northern part of the Gaza envelope. But that started already at 2001, and as time went by, the range also grew. When I left there in 2005, rockets were already hitting the outskirts of Ashkelon, and the price we were paying over there was growing higher and higher. And so the decision for the disengagement was made, and in 2005, Israel evacuated the Gaza Strip, evacuating all the Jewish settlements. About 8,500 people were taken out, Israelis were taken out of the Gaza Strip, and those areas that I showed you in blue were demolished. That was part of my job at the time as an engineering officer in that area. Following that, we of course know that Hamas took power first through elections, and then ousted the Fatah representatives that were still in the Gaza Strip. And since then, Israel has been in continuous and had continuous rounds of attacks and operations against these terrorist attacks coming from there, with about a dozen or so operations in different sizes. The biggest one would be Protective Edge back in 2014, which also included a ground operation in Gaza, although much more limited than what we've seen this time around. And this leads us to October 7th and the horrible events of that day. And to begin to understand what happened there and the tragedy of it, it's worth talking about the chain of events on that day. So it all started at around 6:25 with a massive attack coming in, a rocket attack coming from Gaza to many of the communities in the Gaza envelope and far beyond that. Alarms were going off everywhere across Israel. My phone, a lot of Israelis here have the red alert on our phones. My phone rang, the alarm sounded while I was in Turkey at 6:25 in the morning, and this kept on going. It was clear something big was happening, and soon enough we started to get videos through our different groups. My Army Reserve group started to send videos, unbelievable videos that just was so hard to comprehend what we were seeing. We were seeing paragliders coming in to the community of Netiva Asara. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, which is over here. Paragliders crossing the border and attacking the communities on the northern part over here. We saw vans with terrorists inside the streets of Sderot, just completely incomprehensible at the moment. And it was very hard to understand how this happened. And we could take a look at exactly what happened on those first minutes. And I'll go back to that northern lookout. Again, we're looking at Netiva Asara. this community over here, and you can see how close it is to the border. Again, the border marked in red. We're talking about more or less 100 meters between here and the border. And the attack started, as I said, by a missile attack, and shortly after that followed with attacks from drones and rockets, not aimed at the civilian population at the moment, but at the IDF assets along the fence. Mainly, you can see them over here. On the fence, if I zoom in as much as I can, you can see this tower over here. This is a system called Ro'a Yora, or Sees and Shoots. It's a remote system that's a camera, a high-definition camera, that's connected to a machine gun and an anti-tank missile, remotely controlled. This place is not manned, remotely controlled, and is able to eliminate threats approaching the fence without risking any soldiers' lives, and able to give really quick response. These were the first targets of Hamas that day. And you can see actually over here very clearly where it came from. You can see this tower over here, that's a Hamas outpost, or at least used to be. This is exactly where the Northern Brigade of the IDF, the Northern Brigade Command, used to sit before the disengagement. And there's a video of a missile, an anti-tank missile, being fired from that position and taking out this system on the very first minutes of the attack. This happened here, and with drones around the border, disabling these systems very quickly. Right after that, the next target were the cameras, and you can see it also over here. These towers that are located all around the Gaza envelope, again, host high-definition cameras with night vision, day vision, with radar systems enabling them to see in fog and stormy weather. And they were attacked immediately, again, through drones and missiles, disabling them and rendering the IDF in these areas virtually blind. Another system that was attacked were these towers that you can see over here. These are communication towers. And with communications down and the optics down, it created a fog of war for the IDF that made response very sluggish that day. And that led to the next part of the attack, which was storming the barrier. In the northern part, the point of entry, the biggest point of entry, I should say, because there were a few others, was the Erez crossing. Now, the Erez crossing that you can see over here is the point of entry between the Gaza Strip and Israel for pedestrians. Up until just a couple of years ago, you would have a few dozen people coming in through there every day. It was limited to a few business people from Gaza and humanitarian workers and other NGOs and diplomats that would go through here. But a few years ago, permits were given to Gazan workers and slowly increased. Up to 17,000 permits were given. And this is the point of entry where they came through. If you go there, it looks kind of like an airport terminal, not unlike Netbag, Ben Gurion Airport. And it was stormed in the first hour, in the first minutes of the attack, and the fences were brought down, and cars and vans and terrorists just walking in came through, hundreds of them, and started to attack the communities, mainly Netiv HaSara, which is here, and the Erez community over here. The response, unfortunately, was fairly slow for the people of Netiv HaSara. What they did, and what most of the communities did immediately, was go into their shelters that for many are in their homes in this area, for all of them, in fact, and wait, because they thought it was just a standard rocket attack that happens way too often. And they were waiting for the sirens to go off and to turn off, and they could get back to their routine. But as time progressed, they understood something else was happening, and they started to hear anti-tank missiles, and they started to hear gunfire, and they understood that something bigger is afoot. Unfortunately, each of these communities has a first response unit comprised of the residents of these communities. And what happened a few years ago is that they are armed with M16s, with automatic weapons, and and vests and grenades and everything you need to defend a community like this. But a few years back, they were asked by the IDF to give back those weapons, or at least put them in a bunker in the center of the community to avoid having people steal them. And what happened is they had to, the first response unit had their own personal handguns, but the first thing they wanted to do is go get the more heavier equipment. And unfortunately, Hamas was aware of this, and they put throughout the communities. This is something we saw time and time again in different communities along the Gaza envelope. They went and ambushed the first responders going to these bunkers, and were able, and that really limited the response that they had. Just to show what a difference it would make, just a few minutes of response time, we could take a look at the communities just further north. Over here, you have Yad Mordechai. Now, Yad Mordechai, you could see, I mean, we're not talking about, it's less than a mile difference between these two communities, with a road leading right up to it. And while Netiva Sarah suffered heavy losses, Yad Mordechai had 0 casualties that day. And one of the reasons was they had those few minutes to prepare for the attack, hearing on the radio, on the communications, and talking to the people in Netiva Sarah. They were able to get the weapons they needed. They were able to set up a perimeter and defend themselves. Another thing that helped, and I'll go back to the map, to the main map for that, is that as Israeli IDF and special forces started to head to that area, they were coming from the north on Route 4 over here. The first time they encountered Hamas terrorists was in Somet Yad Mordechai, the Yad Mordechai intersection, right over here. Now, this is something we heard throughout the day of IDF response. They reached the point of contact with the enemy, engaged them, and they were sure this is the point of entry. This is the point of contact. This is where they have to be to fend off this attack. They did not realize the size of this attack and that multiple breaches all over the Gaza Strip were happening simultaneously. And so while they're engaging over here, killing some of the terrorists over here, others of the terrorists turned back and moved to other communities, namely to the Erez community. They were able to stop them over here, but the other communities that were close to the border, they're the ones who suffered the most. And I'll give another example. And that's this community over here, the northern community of Nachal Oz. And Nachal Oz, again, you can see how close they are to the fence, but not just to the fence, how close they are to the population, to the built-up areas of Gaza. This neighborhood over here is Shaja'iyah, which again, you might have heard in the news, that was one of the biggest strongholds in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, which the IDF dealt with last while taking over the northern part. And again, there were breaches, about 30 breaches throughout the fence. And one of the biggest ones was right over here, across from Nachal Oz community. Now, the main target apparently was not the Nachal Oz community. Of course, they went there too, but the main community was this other little area over here. And this is the IDF Gaza Northern Brigade. This is where the command center for the entire Northern Brigade of the IDF sits, the Nachal Oz base. I served here as well. You can actually see my office up over here. And the reason this was target for the first attack in the first minutes is, you remember, I mentioned the cameras and the shoot and see and shoot system. This is where it was operated from. They were mostly female soldiers sitting in a bunker right over here, and the cameras fed directly into there, as well as control of the remote systems that would allow them to shoot. And so that's why this was one of the main focuses of the attack. And this place was stormed, but what we were told is over 100 terrorists that managed to take out that control center very quickly on, which really hindered the IDF's response. As I zoom out, I'll show another location, and I've heard that you talked to someone, a survivor of the Nova Festival massacre. So that happened right over here. And up to date, we don't really know if this was a target, if they knew about this ahead of time or not. But this was the biggest point of this biggest massacre through that day, and in fact, since the Holocaust, really, of Jewish people. And one of the reasons we're not sure that this was planned ahead of time is that there's evidence that Hamas terrorists came through and they were asking people over here to help them get or to give them instructions on how to get to the Re'im outpost or to the Re'im, not really an outpost, it's the division headquarters. And same as with Nahal Oz, they made a beeline for this area over here, which hosts the command for the entire Gaza Strip. And they knew that taking out this base over here, conquering this base over here, would render the IDF's response or would hinder it severely. And that's exactly what they did. They came here, they had very detailed information of where the command center is, where the high-ranking officers live and slept, who they are. They had pictures of the faces of the high-ranking commanders as well. And they came in there, and the only really area that they weren't able to take over was the command bunker, where the division commander remained inside, locked in, while battle was raging all around him, trying to coordinate the response throughout the day and days to come. It took, I believe it took about 12 hours until they were able to regain some control of this area. Now, of course, we could talk about each community and talk about the heroics of the day, but that really would take us hours. And I do invite you to then, after we finish here, to go and view this map, and in each location, you'll be able to see what happened there and read a little bit more about the stories and the acts of valor throughout that day. But more or less that concludes the first hours of the attack. Happy to answer questions. Maybe I'll take a break now and answer any questions about the IDF response or anything that I've discussed so far. Do we have any questions yet?
Not yet, but I would encourage you, if you do have questions, to put them into the Q&A. Can you tell us a little bit, if there are any questions, about how this footage was created, how long you've been using the drone system for, just a little more background on that?
Sure. So yeah, I've been, since COVID, basically, I've been taking drone photography throughout Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza envelope. And that's what we saw, the drone footage we saw from the northern location. I have another one from the southern location. What we're seeing here is actually from Google Earth. And today, I would go back down there with the drone, but today they would definitely shoot it down. Also, my drone has been enlisted to the IDF. And if we want to talk about the IDF's poor response that day and in the days to come, with reservists having a lack of the appropriate gear, then if they had to enlist my drone, that means we were not prepared for something like this. And there are many examples like that, both in the north and by Gaza. I mean, till today, there's still IDF soldiers who go out fundraising to get bulletproof vests, which is just mind-boggling, to be honest.
Absolutely. So I'm not seeing any questions, so if you want to continue on with the tour, and if you have questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah. Maybe I'll mention one more thing about the response, which was the Air Force response that day. And a lot has been said about that. A lot of people talking about it, and the lack of response by the Air Force, which might have, if there was more heavier response, might have been able to save more lives. And it's true that there were 2 helicopters on standby, which really were the main vehicle, the main platform to assist the ground forces and to try to block off the routes of the terrorists coming in. Fighter jets were not as capable of doing that. These helicopters, unfortunately, were also based far away. They were supposed to be based in the Ramon camp, but instead were based up north, which added time to their arrival. And with only two of them available, once they got to the area, their munitions were spent quite quickly, and they had to go and load up again, time and time again. But what's really amazing throughout the day is that because the fog of war was so thick and really was very hard to understand what was going on, the Air Force had trouble allocating targets to its pilots, both helicopter, fighter jets, and drone operators. Very hard to give them the quality targets that they needed to really be effective. And what happened is the chain of command completely broke down. And what we saw is drone operators getting on the message groups of the different communities, talking directly to them and asking for targets from civilians who are down on the ground, helping and direct them to the right place and where they're really needed. And we saw helicopter pilots talking directly to low-level officers on the ground that they happened to know, that they were friends, so they could get on the phone and talk to them. And that's how the first hours of this operation happened. And this is again throughout the entire from north to south, and contributed on one hand to the tragedy of the day, but on the other hand, we saw a lot of ingenuity, a lot of bravery from the soldiers on the ground, and collaboration since then between the Air Force and the IDF has been superb, I have to say, and with very close air support throughout the campaign. So moving from the day of, we'll talk a little bit about the campaign so far. And the campaign started on the northern part of the Gaza Strip that you could see over here. Again, the IDF designated it from Wadi Gaza, marked here in blue, all the way, of course, till the border. And the ground offensive began in two fronts. One of them, and let's see if I can take this. And I don't have that option here. All right. So one of them came in from the northern part, mostly to secure the northern border and not allow further incursions into the northern communities. Although, of course, by this time, all these communities have been relocated to other places around Israel. So the first one division came in from the north and then headed down south along the coastline towards Gaza City. And the second division came in from this area over here. And basically, their objective was to cut off the northern Gaza Strip from the southern Gaza Strip to prevent Hamas leadership, both political and military leadership, as well as hostages, from being taken from the northern part and headed down south. This was, of course, started with a heavy aerial attack on known Hamas positions, and a call for all Gazans to evacuate from the northern part through this route over here, which is the Salah ad-Din road. It goes from the north till the south, all the way through the central camps, Dir el-Balach, Khan Yunis, and Rafah, and to the Rafah crossing that we could talk about in a few minutes. And this was designated as a safe route for civilians to evacuate. And indeed, most civilians did evacuate, while Hamas was objecting and, in fact, trying to prevent that, in some cases shooting at their own civilians. But in the end of the day, there were about 150,000 people left in the northern Gaza Strip out of about 1.2 million that were there to begin with. And the way that the IDF attack began was, first of all, taking control of the areas between the Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia and the border, and then starting to work in from the sea inward towards Gaza City. And they left the two biggest pockets of resistance, which are the Sajaiya neighborhood over here and the Jabalia refugee camp to last. And basically, that's where most of the Hamas terrorists who were not able to escape to the south, these are the areas where they eventually went to. And once the Gaza City was more or less cleared, as well as the northern cities of Beit Lahia and Beit Hanun, then the IDF started the attack on Jabalia and Sajaiya. And while already a month ago, the IDF has pronounced that the fight for the northern West Bank, the northern Gaza Strip, has ended and it was captured. We still see attacks coming from there, including every once in a while a missile attack coming from the north. Just to say there are still pockets of resistance over here that the IDF has not covered, and that has to do mainly for the reason of the tunnel system, the very, very advanced tunnel system that Hamas has built there. And over here we could see in red, this is the tunnel system of Hamas that was built, and the IDF released a map of in 2014. So this is only what we know of, or the IDF knows of, and only up to 2014. So you can imagine how much more advanced this system is. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. I think the last estimate I heard was 700 kilometers, so I guess like 500 miles worth of tunnels throughout the Gaza Strip, up down to 50 meters under the ground, which is absolutely insane, and the IDF assumed was not possible. And we're talking about areas that with not just very, rudimentary tunnels, but well-established ones with ventilation, electric system, communication systems, areas that they could hold in for long periods of time. And so this is the IDF's main concern at the moment in the northern area, is trying meticulously going to all the indications they have and trying to eliminate as much of that second city of Gaza, the underground city of Gaza, as they can. So this was what the IDF now calls stage 1 of the attack. The stage 2 was the southern cities, with an emphasis on Khan Yunis. Now, the reason Khan Yunis is such a strategic area is, first of all, it's the biggest southern city, the biggest city in the southern Gaza Strip. It's also where we assume the most of Hamas leadership, both military and political, fled to from the north, where they were before. It's also where we assume many of the hostages are. And it's also the home town of Sinwar and Muhammadef. And so it became a primary target for the IDF, who just a couple days ago, or really yesterday, or the day before, managed to completely encircle Khan Yunis and is basically now laying siege to it. While they're doing that, another division that was operating in the north crossed the Wadi Gaza and started with the Burej and Nuseirat camps. These are the central camps of the Gaza Strip. And fighting there has ended more or less, or at least the full-on attack by the IDF has ended. And the brigade, the division that was in charge of this area, that included the Golani brigade, just last week, withdrew from the Gaza Strip. And at the moment, the situation is we have a full ongoing attack on Khan Yunis, while in the northern part, we have a limited amount of units securing the northern border, and most of the remaining units are not engaged in an ongoing attack, but very specific, pinpointed operations against intelligence-based operatives that they have in these areas. The last city that or has remained untouched mostly, or at least by ground forces, is the city of Rafah. And we don't know exactly when that's going to happen, but a lot of indications show that operatives from Khan Yunis who saw that the IDF is closing on them have moved to this city over here. There are problems with a ground defense on that area. The main problem being our neighbor to the south, Egypt, that does not want to see a ground attack on this area, does not want to see IDF tanks taking control of the Philadelphia route, which is runs parallel to the border. One of the main reasons is they don't want to see, at this point, if the IDF attacks there, the only way to flee, the only direction is south. And they do not want to see Palestinian refugees storming their gates and trying to make it into Sinai. To eliminate that possibility, they started building fences, additional fences along the way, along this route, and warned the IDF that it's going to be a big problem if they do, in fact, start a ground offense over there. Before I pause again for any questions, I just want to mention this one additional area. You can see this here. I can see in blue, this is the Gush Katif. This is where the Gush Katif settlements were before they were evacuated. And that area in yellow, so that's the Mwasi humanitarian area that IDF designated as a safe zone. I should say it probably can hold, according to experts, between 300 and 400,000 refugees. We're talking about right now well over 1.5 million refugees and internally displaced people. Some of them displaced more than once. They fled from their homes in the north, reached places like Dir el-Balach over here, or the central camps, and after the IDF attack had to move again, and now probably had to move again from there down to Rafah. And so the humanitarian situation, I should say, is dire. And maybe I'll also speak for a minute about the humanitarian situation and what's being done right now. So there are 2 points of entry at the moment for goods coming into the Gaza Strip. One is from the Rafah crossing, and the other one is from the Kerem Shalom crossing. We could see it over here. So this is the southern community of Kerem Shalom, right over here under us, under our drone. And over here, you could see the crossing of Kerem Shalom. This crossing is not for pedestrian, only for goods coming from Israel into Gaza. And the Rafah crossing is just up ahead over there. So at the moment, or up until today, there were trucks coming in from both crossings, hundreds of trucks a day with humanitarian aid. All of them were checked by the IDF before entering. The ones in Rafah, the trucks coming in from Rafah are checked in the Nitzana crossing, which is further down south, which is the border crossing between Israel and Egypt. And then trucks eventually were allowed to also go through Kerem Shalom, checked by the IDF over here. Today, actually, there were protesters who blocked the trucks from going in. And today, only 9 trucks went in through the Kerem Shalom crossing. They were blocking it, demanding that no humanitarian aid will be provided until the hostages are released. All right. Any questions so far?
None so far, but I'm finding this very intriguing and fascinating. If there are any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A. And I think you can continue on.
All right. So if we have some time, it's worth talking about the day after and where we're heading. So like I said, at the moment, we are what the IDF is describing as stage 3, which means limited incursions into the northern part of the Gaza Strip and the central part. There's still, like I said, a full-on attack on Khan Yunis. And what they're doing right now is creating a buffer zone along the border of the Gaza Strip. Now, if you ask any of the people evacuated from these communities, what will it take to have you come back to your communities to feel safe again? I think almost all of them will say, we need a buffer zone. We need And the only difference would be how big of a buffer zone are you expecting? Some would say 3 kilometers, 2 kilometers, 1 kilometer, but they all agree that that is needed, and the IDF agrees as well. They want to move the strategic depth needed to protect these communities from the Israeli side to the Gazan side. So what we're seeing now is engineering units clearing areas along the border, up to about a mile from the border, from any area that could be the terrorists could use to launch an attack. That means any built-up areas in that area, in that zone, any agricultural land where people could hide in. All of that is being demolished right now, and they're also searching over there for tunnels. Unfortunately, that's exactly what they were doing by the Kisufim, over here yesterday when the terrible tragedy happened. We had engineering forces in this area over here working to demolish homes that were close, about 600 meters from the border, demolish these areas so they cannot be used to launch terrorist attacks against the communities close to the fence. When apparently this is still under investigation, trying to understand exactly what happened, but terrorists were either hiding in trees or came out of a tunnel, were able to fire RPG missile that killed 2 people in a tank, 2 of our soldiers in the tank, and then hit the structure where the engineering forces were working to rig these buildings and blow them up. It caused a chain reaction that caused a huge explosion that collapsed the buildings on top of our soldiers over there. And as a result, we had one of our biggest tragedies of this war with 21 soldiers who died in this attack. But this was all part of the IDF's plan of creating a buffer zone along the Gaza Strip. So that's where we are at the moment. And if we take a moment just to try to theorize what's going to come next, not as far as the IDF response, but more as what are the eventual scenarios that we could see to end this war, or then I could really think of 4 options that we're talking about. The first one would be the IDF and Israel taking complete control over the Gaza Strip. We have a lot of the ultra right-wing members of Knesset, not only ultra right-wing, but also Likud MKs talking about taking over the entire area. And in fact, some were talking about bringing Gush Katif back and establishing more settlements. There's obviously a lot of challenges with that. Mainly Israel having to take control and be responsible for 2.3 million Palestinians. Another one is the international community, who will have none of that at the moment. But as far as the right wing is concerned over here, that's basically their point of view. Israel has to take complete security control and in fact move civilians back there. The other option is giving the area to the PA, which again has a lot of problems. The main one being, I don't know if it's the main one of the biggest ones are that this government is not willing to discuss that, even remotely, even with the US pushing and the international community pushing, and even saying that we're talking about a reformed Palestinian Authority. So not the same leaders, not Abu Mazen, not the corrupt leadership, but a reformed leadership under someone like, let's say, Salam Fayyad, who is trusted by the international community and many Israelis as well. Another problem with that is it's going to be very hard for the PA to establish control in the Gaza Strip, riding in on the backs of IDF tanks. The third option that we could imagine, and that I think there's a lot of expectation in Israel and the civilian population in Israel, is international control, led by the moderate Arab nations, or by a multinational force or something like that. A lot of expectations from Egypt to take control and to be kind of to spearhead that. The chances of that are also very, very slim. Egypt wants nothing to do with it. Definitely, they are not looking to take control of 2.3 million Palestinians. And the international community does not, I don't think, gonna do the dirty work for us. And that leads the fourth option, which at the moment, I'm sad to say, I think looks like the direction we're heading in, which is no solution. Just basically leaving a vacuum of power. We say no Hamas. Hamas is not returning. That's not an option. But if not Hamas and not the PA and not us and not the international community, then who? That's a great question. Usually when the vacuum of power is left, you have extremists taking advantage and control over those kinds of situations. So if it's not Hamas, we might see others rise over there. We might see ISIS coming back to this region. We might see a different organization, maybe even worse than what we've seen so far. But bottom line is chaos is not good for anyone. It's not good for the civilian population left in Gaza. It's not good for the security of Israel. But at the moment, it seems that Israel's political leadership, is not willing to even discuss the day after, and so we're headed with eyes wide open towards that outcome of a power vacuum in the Gaza Strip, and what happens on after that, God only knows. All right.
Wow, thank you so much, Sori. Are there any last questions today? I just want to thank Sori for this incredible drone footage and the really in-depth look at what's happening on the ground in Gaza and what led up to it, to this experience. I want to thank Max for helping us convene and organize this. In the chat is the link to our resources page. Our next, we have a webinar next Wednesday, excuse me, with the Jewish Agency for Israel, discussing the work that they've been doing in response to October 7th. And we have an ongoing through the end of February webinars every week. So again, thank you to Sori, Max, and the entire Israel Policy Forum. I definitely highly recommend they have webinars and podcasts on a regular basis. So I'll definitely recommend them. So thank you so much for being here today, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. And we can close down the webinar. Thank you.